The Sovereign Wealth Fund of Djibouti organized a three-day summit this week to discuss the potential and the prospects of attracting investment into the Horn of Africa's economy. The summit, which held in partnership with the African Business magazine, brought together high-level public and private sector speakers and focusing on key issues in regional investment opportunities.
And the problem is that the money we need in Africa for our investments are not in the budget. This is constrained. It's less and less in the public aid, because you have seen the Trump shock in terms of humanitarian aid. But what you have not seen as much, but has been very important, is the UK saying, I will finance my defense effort by reducing public aid to development by 40%. And the figure for France is, in 2 years, minus 37% of public aid for development. So humanitarian, it is a major shock. Billions of US dollars. But in terms of development and investment, what the UK and the European Union have to do in order to finance their defense of effort is another shock. So we need, as a substitute, to be able to be to the financial market, where you have an immense reserve, but we have to lower the risk and improve. You cannot improve your treble A, but they has a bit of space to get a treble A, because their first rating has been a double A, and each of our African DFIs now, Afrexim Bank, everybody, are able to go to the market, because the private sector and the financial market and the asset managers are the only solution if we want to bridge the gap.
We have a bigger market in Africa. And if we are looking at 300 million customers in US or thereabout, we've just seen from McKinsey that we are projected to grow to 1.6 billion in 2030. So the question is that even as we chase the American market, the European market, I think there's a bigger stake, there's a bigger market in Africa that we need to look at. Much of the textile imports is coming from Asia, from, of course, the Europeans. So we supply raw cotton, we supply lint, but then we import goods worth much more than what we as Africans are producing. So yes, the Trump tariffs will have a problem for us in the short term, but I believe it is in the resilience that we bring in that we are going to be able to circumvent some of the impacts of this tariff. Let me give you an example. We have organically grown cotton in Africa, and that is what the world is looking for. New technology is coming up in textile, for example, which is going to use less water. In fact, the plant that has been put up in Benin is using 95% less water. In terms of 95% of the water you put in the first time is recycled. And therefore, even in terms of economy, which hasn't been achieved in Asia, hasn't been achieved in India, is the kind of technology we are putting in now, which is more resilient. If you look at sustainability, if you look at being able to do a trace from farm to shop, it is something that is more possible in Africa than Asia. And we believe that as consumer trends change, especially in the Western world, then what we are putting in Africa is going to be, first of all, more sustainable, and we are going to drive demand just from a traceability aspect the fact that the cotton that we are using is organically grown cotton, we have to put ourselves in a stage where we are more competitive, even if not in price, but in all other aspects.
You know, I think the record we had right before COVID was that about 30% of the infrastructure projects were being done, through the private sector in Africa, and almost all of infrastructure projects are some form of PPPs. However, the imperative for public-private partnerships was probably not as evident before because the fiscal space for a lot of countries was such that projects that could be public sector financed would be public sector financed, and then the projects that could be purely privately concessioned would also be privately concessioned, such as port concessions and things of that sort. But with the limited fiscal space, we've begun to see that there's a greater pressure and urgency in doing PPPs. However, you can't go really from 0 to 100 immediately. So one of the things that we're seeing that has to be done, on the government side is that they have to reform the legal, regulatory, institutional frameworks. They also have to build capacity because PPPs are complex contracts in which you're trying to assign risk to the party that's best able to handle that risk. So it's really a complex contract. And so there has to be capacity really on the government side, that can equal the capacity on the private sector side that comes also with a barrage of lawyers. So there has to be almost equal capacity. So that's something, we're working on as well. Then in addition, I think we heard it earlier today that there's a dearth of bankable projects, and there are different ways in which you can create those bankable projects. Some of it is really through transaction advisory that would be done by the likes of ourselves, IFC, and of course, the commercial institutions who can advise on, structuring PPPs. A lot of it would be done really through project development. And yes, we've set up institutions like Africa 50, which is the premier infrastructure project developer in Africa, but we need more.
For us, as a priority, as a vision, is to accelerate in the continent the digital and the financial inclusion. And to do so, we need to be working closely with the government. And to have the right policies that will allow us to accelerate whether the coverage or whether to accelerate the access to the technology. In order to accelerate the development and technology to access, for example, what we were talking about earlier, the artificial intelligence, or to accelerate the upgrade of our network in order to have access to 3G and 5G, you need two things. You need two criteria to be met. One is access to the technology, which means the know-how, and access to capital. And the government have to, and referring back to the Prime Minister, have to encourage more and more privatization of the infrastructure in order to be able to bring partners that are credible that have access as well to the capital, have access to the financial market to allow to bring the funds into the country in order to build that infrastructure. And by doing that, the government will be focusing on setting the policies, the right policies and the right guidelines in order to make sure that whomever they are partnering with is actually delivering on their strategic objectives, mainly in terms of the right quality of service, of the data, or of the voice telecom services that we are providing, or by giving access to that technology in a rural area and in underserved markets.
And the rest of the Ps are very welcome. So, whether it's the private sector, the likes of Action, or whomever they are, DFIs, our friends from AFDB or RISE, or all of them. I mean, at the end of the day, what we give, I think the word insurance could be used here. We give a bit of, comfort. People feel comfortable having the sovereign wealth fund of a country, X, in this case Djibouti, having the interests aligned. So instead of you taking 100% of the risk, and you can do it as a foreign investor on FDI, you could have the sovereign wealth fund of Djibouti coming in at, usually we target 20 to 25%, because our objective is not to be operators of things as our business model. Our business model is to be a strategic financial investor. But having a sovereign wealth fund, you are under the oversight. My direct boss is the President of Djibouti. The President of Djibouti is our tutel. They oversee us. So obviously, when you have doers like that, when you have political will, you can fast-track things. And this is where bureaucracy sometimes slows things down. And that's the reality of things. So this is why when we talk public versus private, often we see the speed of the private sector a bit quicker, if not a lot quicker, depending on the country. But having a sovereign wealth fund, an institution like NSIA, Nigeria or Azerbaijan, or in this case Djiboutian Sovereign Wealth Fund being on your side, getting the interests aligned, I think can fast-track things and facilitate things. And in the end, we're not charities either. So we're not a charity. We are here to build a multi-generational saving spot for the future generations of Djibouti in this case, and therefore we need to generate returns. The capital that we have, we need to make the best use of it, and the best use of it is with people who have done it before. We cannot afford, as Djibouti, to be guinea pigs. We cannot start something from scratch that's never been done before. So we want to do it with people who have done it. The Actions of this world, etc., have done it, and we would like them to do it here. And then, we ride the wave with them. So in the end, we want to fast track. Time is money. Le temps c'est de l'argent, and we need to fast track things. Expectations are so high. Human beings are so, impatient to get things done, and that's why it's better to hold hands together and make it happen.